Welcome everyone to the 2025-2026 Speaker Series hosted by the Forum for Equity in Elementary Mathematics. I'm Cynthia Colon, your host for this evening. We would like you to know that today's webinar is being recorded so it can be posted and shared on the Forum website. We would also like you to know that we have reserved some time at the end of the presentation for questions. You can submit your questions throughout the session via the chat box to Q&A host. Before we begin tonight's presentation, I would like to introduce you to the Forum. The Forum for Equity in Elementary Mathematics is a web-based resource hosted at TURC in Cambridge, Massachusetts. TURC is a nonprofit organization whose mission is to improve math and science education. As part of its mission, TURC is committed to modeling how diversity, equity, and belonging can improve STEM education and research practices in order to create and support inclusive learning environments and equitable outcomes for all. The Forum for Equity in Elementary Mathematics was launched almost 2 years ago as an online, free resource to support educators who are thinking about equity, access, identity, and agency in the elementary mathematics classroom. The Speaker Series is one of the ways the Forum brings together educators to share work, ideas, and perspectives related to these critical topics. Last year's series, Elements of Equitable Math Learning Communities, was organized around 4 areas we believe are essential when reflecting on equitable teaching and learning. This year's series will focus on students, specifically the importance of knowing them as mathematics learners and as individuals with diverse backgrounds, experiences, and interests. In tonight's webinar, Culturally Relevant Math Tasks, When What You Teach Connects to What They Are, to who they are, we are pleased to welcome our first speaker, Dr. Pamela Seda. Dr. Seda will explore how connecting math students' everyday lives and ways of thinking can spark curiosity and confidence. Grounded in the Understand Your Students Well principle of ICUCARE Framework, her session offers practical ways to move beyond surface-level connections and create authentic learning experiences where every child feels seen, valued, and capable of deep mathematical thinking. Dr. Pamela Seda is an educational consultant with over 30 years of experience in mathematics education and the CEO of Seda Educational Consulting. She created the ICUCARE Equity Framework, and she's also the co-author of Choosing to See, a framework for equity in the math classroom. A former teacher, coach, and K-12 mathematics coordinator, Dr. Seda is nationally recognized for her work supporting equitable math instruction and empowering marginalized learners. And now, please welcome Dr. Seda.
Thank you so much for that great introduction. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. All righty. So I'm hoping everyone can see my screen. All right. So I want to start off by letting you know I do have a digital handout for today's session. You can use the QR code or you can use the link that's going to be in the handout. So link that's got the link to the handout that's going to be in the chat. So you can get the handout that way. So let's see, did we see it? Yep, there it goes. Wonderful. All right, so let me tell you what my goals are for today's session is I have 2 goals for you today. One is I want you to be able to understand why it's important to use culturally relevant tasks in a math classroom. And then the second thing is I want you to be able to use a continuum of culturally relevant math tasks to help all students feel seen, valued, and capable of deep mathematical thinking. All right, so let's go. Let's start. First question, why is it important to use culturally relevant tasks in an elementary math classroom? All right, so first thing, learning anything, including math, is a social endeavor. Culture impacts what we value, what we perceive is worthy of our attention. So if we think about why do we learn what we learn, it's because someone, whoever happens to be in our sphere of influence, decided that this is important. So that is all impacted by our culture. And the thing about culture is it's invisible until you get out of your culture. So for you, culture is just how things get done. It's the way things are. But it's not till you leave your culture and enter a culture that's different that sometimes you begin to recognize, oh, everybody doesn't do things that way. So I give you an example. I just do not like cold salsa. And so for me, what I'll do is I love it first when it's straight from the store before I open it. But once you open it, you have to put it in the refrigerator. So I would always take the chill off the salsa by putting it in the microwave for maybe 5 to 8 seconds just to take the chill off because I hate cold salsa. And so, of course, all my kids did the same thing. That they grew up seeing me take the chill off the salsa because I hate cold salsa. Well, one day my daughter was, away at school and she was in the dorm and she put the salsa in the microwave and people looked at her like, "Ooh, what are you doing?" And that's the first time that she realized that everybody didn't heat up their salsa in the microwave. That's culture. Now, of course, she was just like, don't other me, but that was just kind of funny thing. But it's just to say that they thought it was strange and she thought it was perfectly normal until she saw that other people didn't do it that way. So the other reason why we need to be culturally relevant is because we have an incredible amount of data that shows that our current math instructional practices are missing the mark for many, many of our students, especially those from marginalized groups. And so we can do better. But while we're talking about culture, I wanted to let you know there are actually 3 levels of culture. And this diagram is from, or this presentation is from Zen to Math. They usually describe culture like an iceberg, right? What you see at the surface is not the maximum. The majority is below the surface that you don't see. So when we're talking about surface culture, this is the thing that we normally think about when we think about culture. We think about food, flags, festivals, holidays, music, games, literature, language, art. All of those things are what we normally associate with culture. Um, and the thing about it, those are not the aspects that really impact teaching and learning. It's the part below the surface that really more impacts teaching and learning. So let's right below the surface is shallow culture. And it's like a concepts of time, personal space, making eye contact, how we handle emotions, parenting styles, tempo of the work, whether you're used to working very fast or whether you're used to kind of laid back, taking your time. That's all a part of shallow culture. And those do impact the classroom environment, the culture and climate in our classrooms. But I think the thing that probably really impacts teaching learning is that deep culture. And that's, how do we go about making decisions? Concept of self. How do I see myself? What is my worldview? My concepts of spirituality. Do I have a preference for competition or cooperation, or even the definitions of kinship? So I think about how an example of how this might show up in a classroom is I've often heard my students say, "Oh, yeah, that's my cousin." And what they really mean is not that there's blood related, but that this is person who means I value enough that I treat them like family, like I look after them. So when you see that this is your cousin and you're looking out for them, some of my students might think that they're looking out and helping their quote unquote cousin by giving them the answers on a test. And initially, I'm looking at that as cheating. And if I do not understand the cultural norm that they have, they think that that's helping their friend out. I could immediately create a cultural mismatch situation there that could cause a potential conflict. Doesn't mean that I automatically say, "Oh yeah, cheating is okay," but understanding that they think that they're helping out their cousin, I can say, well, you know what? That's really admirable that you want to help them out. But let me show you how to really help them because you're giving them the answers, not really helping them at all. That the way you really can help them is help them make sense of the math. And then you can give them instructions for how to do that. So that's just a way that culture can show up in the classroom, and that when we don't pay attention to it, it can cause cultural mismatch, which can then lead to conflict in the classroom. All right, so I've created ICUCARE Framework, which came out of my doctoral work in me trying to figure out what are some of the reasons why there are these achievement gaps when it comes to different marginalized groups. And so ICU Care, each of the letters in ICU Care stands for one of the principles. So I is include others as experts. C is be critically conscious. U is understand your students well. The second C is use culturally relevant curricula. A is assess, activate, build on prior knowledge. R is release control. And E is expect more. And collectively, we can put all of these together to think about how do we engage students, especially with all the myriads of instructional decisions that we have to make. We can use this as a framework to help us understand how can we make sure that we're meeting the needs of all of our students. But for today's session, I'm going to zero in on this section, the two C's and the U, critical consciousness, understand your students well, and use culturally relevant curricula. All right, so let's start with C, use culturally relevant curricula. And the way I've defined it in my book is use instructional materials in ways that help students see themselves as doers of mathematics and help them overcome the negative stereotypes and messages regarding who is and who isn't mathematically smart. Because let's face it, math has an image problem. And when we think about who is good in mathematics, oftentimes this image of some Albert Einstein looking guy with crazy hair may come to mind, or maybe a Steve Urkel with a pocket protector and someone who's socially inept. And that's not who our students want to be. That's not who they aspire to. And so it's important for us as math educators to help change that image if we really want students to engage in doing the hard work that it takes to become mathematically smart. And so one of the ways that I have found it's important to do that is through representation. So there's this picture here that was taken at an event sponsored by the National Organization of Minority Architects. And my daughter is the young lady in the blue dress. And when she was young, I noticed that she was very artistic. And the reason that stood out to me was because I was a math major and my husband was a computer science major. So math and science were non-negotiables in my house. So the fact that she was artistic really stood out to me. And so what I said to her early on was, oh, I think architecture would be a great field for you. Very great career choice because it's a great blend of math and science and art. And when I mentioned it to her, she was not remotely interested. She was like, nope. And so sometime in middle school, she took a field trip to Georgia Tech because I live in the metro Atlanta area. And she happened to hear a African American female architect spoke to her Girl Scout troop. And so when she came home, she said, Mom, I'm going to go to Georgia Tech and I'm going to be an architect. And she did. She ended up going to Georgia Tech. And I am proud to say that she is one of the 0.5% of licensed architects that are Black women. And yes, I share that as a proud mom. Um, but seeing that statistic of 0.5% shows the power of representation and that we have a lot of work to do. And just like for her, it wasn't until she saw someone who looked like her that she realized she could be an architect. For our students, so for so many of our students, it's the same with mathematics. If they don't see someone who looks like them being successful in mathematics, they're not going to think that they can be. And it doesn't matter what we tell them, they won't believe us. So representation really is important in mathematics as well as a lot of areas. So culturally relevant curricula is actually built on the work of Dr. Gloria Ladson-Billings. She coined the phrase culturally relevant pedagogy. And the reason that I was so attracted to this theory was because it really challenged the prevalent deficit view of researchers at the time. When they were looking at the achievement gap, most of the research was about how do we to find out what's wrong with Black kids, what's wrong with special ed kids? What's wrong with their parenting styles? What's wrong? They were asking that question, very steeped in deficit thinking, and the researchers about how do we fix them. And Dr. Gloria Latson Billings really turned that on his head. And she says, well, obviously, there are teachers who are successful with Black children. Let me find out who they are and what did they do, and let me study them. And so she actually went to Black communities and asked the families in the communities, who's successful with your children? And when she identified them, she went and studied them. And it was several of them. And she found the commonalities. And so out of that study, she came up with these three tenets. The first one was academic achievement, that the work was focused on academic achievement, not about their self-esteem, not on just celebrating diversity. It was focused on academic achievement. And what that means is if we, just because we might have a potluck dinner and celebrate all the different ethnicities that are in their school, that's not being culturally relevant. That's being multicultural. And there's a place for that, but that's not being culturally relevant. Now, if we then somehow turn that potluck dinner into a math lesson to help our students learn math better, then we can say that that's being culturally relevant. So the first bullet is academic achievement. The second one is cultural competence. And what that means is we don't ask our students to check their culture at the door to be successful in math, but it also means that students are competent in their own culture as well as at least one other culture. This is why being culturally relevant is important for all cultures, not just those who are from marginalized groups. And then the last bullet is be critically conscious. And in this critical conscious, she describes it as this agency piece, like how are we empowering our students to be agents of change through the curriculum? Like, why is it important for them to be mathematicians and learn it? And the goal was to teach them how to use the curriculum to change and improve their lives, the lives of their community, the lives of others. So that's the critical consciousness piece. And those three together make it culturally relevant. And I remember having a conversation with her that I love that she says, oftentimes people leave off that third bullet, but she says, rather than thinking about it as a pillar, I've heard people call them pillars. She says, I think of it more as a triangle. I love that math reference because she says, if you don't have all three pieces, it's no longer a triangle. And so she said the same thing. If it didn't have the three tenets, it's not culturally relevant. So that brings me to the idea of what's called mirrors, windows, and sliding glass doors. And of mirrors, windows, and sliding glass doors, mirrors and windows was actually a term that was coined by Emily Stiles back in 1988. And Dr. Rudy Sims Bishop talked about it in terms of multicultural literature. And she said that multicultural literature can act as a mirror where students get to see themselves, but also as a window to where students can see other cultures. And that the sliding glass doors enable students to go back and forth between two cultures, their culture as well as a culture of another. And then Dr. Rochelle Gutierrez was the one that took that same analogy for literature to mathematics. And she says, our math tasks can be the same way. And so one of the reasons why I think this is important is because no one task is going to meet the needs and act as a mirror for all of your students. Our classes are too diverse for that to happen. But what a teacher can ask themselves is when they see a task, they can say, to whom is this task a mirror? And for whom is this task a window? And so then they can make sure that over the course of time, that every student gets to see their task as a mirror as well as a window. And so that's really important so that students get to experience both windows and mirrors in the class. And so that also brings me to the definition that I had of using culturally relevant curricula was that all students can see themselves as doers of mathematics. And so the way that I've defined doing mathematics is noticing patterns, describing patterns, and generalizing patterns. And I have this picture of a baby here because Our brains are hardwired to notice patterns. Infants, they've done studies with infants where they were looking at this train with two toy people on it. And when it went in a tunnel and only one of the toy people came out, the baby just looked really confused. They knew, wait a minute, what's going on here? Whereas when two toys went in and two toys came out, there was not that same look. So babies, our brains are hardwired to notice patterns. So what we can do in our classes is to help students describe those patterns and journalize those patterns. Unfortunately, we have this perception that only the advanced kids can do that. And most of the work that we give to our students is them mimicking the math that we've already shown them. And that's not really doing mathematics. So we need to give all of our students and not rob anyone of those opportunities to truly do mathematics, because when we give them the time to actually do the mathematics, then we are helping them challenge the stereotypes that about who is and who isn't mathematically smart. All right, so that leads me to the U part of the ICUCARE framework, understand your students well, because you cannot create culturally relevant tasks and use culturally relevant curricula if you don't understand your students well. Because if you don't understand your students well, what you'll end up doing is engaging in reinforcing stereotypes rather than challenging them. And so the way I've defined this principle is learn about your students, their families, and their communities for the purpose of improving instructions. That's not making assumptions. Because if you don't take the time to find out who they really are, then you're left with nothing but assumptions. So the reason this principle is important is because we need to understand that our students are not only individuals, they are individuals, but they also represent their families and they represent their communities. And the more that we learn about their families and communities, the better we can use that information to teach them mathematics. So one of the things that I did at the beginning of the year is I did a student survey. I used a Google form and asked my students things like, what are you good at? What are your hobbies? What do you do after school? What are some of the things you like to do just for fun? What is something that you want me to know about you that most people don't already know about you? What are your passions? So those are things that I wanted to find out about them that were not math related, because our students are human beings, not human brains. And before they ever set foot in our classrooms, they have they have they are fully human before they ever set foot in our classrooms. And it's important that we get to know them as human beings, build those relationships with them so that we can find out about them and we can use that information to help teach them mathematics. And that brings me to the first C of the framework, be critically conscious. Um, and that means take time to understand how negative stereotypes impact your students and actively work to erase the effects of those negative stereotypes on the educational outcomes of marginalized students. Because the reality is that there are a variety of negative stereotypes about our students' identities. And they generally come to play when students struggle, when they see something that they've never seen before, or they are challenged in some way. Oftentimes, those stereotypes come into play. And the thing is, if we are not cognizant of those stereotypes, we can't challenge them. We can't help them challenge those stereotypes. We can't empower them to overcome and challenge those stereotypes if we are burying our head in the sand and saying things like, oh, I don't see color, I just see students. It's really important for us to understand and allow our students to bring their full identities into the classroom, in the math classroom, but also that we recognize that if we are not cognizant, if we're not paying attention, we're going to be guilty of reinforcing those stereotypes in our math classes, especially even if we're trying to engage in culturally relevant curricula. It's important for us to pay attention and understand and be aware of the negative stereotypes that may be at play regarding our students' identities. So some of the ways that I've done that is here are some sharing with you some resources. And on the handout, there are links to these resources. So here are some resources that help dispel negative stereotypes about Black people. So there's a website called Mathematicians of the Diaspora. There's a website there. Um, there's another website called Mathematically Gifted and Black, and it started out featuring Black mathematicians um, during Black History Month, and then they broadened it, and it has gone on for several years. They've featured math educators. I've been featured on this website. My co-author, Kendall Brown, has been featured on this website. Now, they are no longer featuring new people, but this website is still available for students to be able to view. And the last resource here is called Beyond Banneker, um, Black Mathematicians. And the thing that I love about Black Mathematicians of Excellence is that this book really goes into some great storytelling about Black mathematicians, not only the challenges that they had to overcome, but how they did that. Like most of them found community, found people that were like-minded that could support them to be able to overcome the challenges and the stigmas that were often associated, the beliefs about Black people and their inability to be able to become mathematicians. So these are some resources for Black people. Um, there are resources to dispel negative stereotypes about Indigenous students. So the first one is a website, um, Indigenous Mathematicians, and the second one is an NCTM publication called Changing the Faces, Mathematics Perspective on Indigenous Students. There are resources that dispel negative stereotypes about Latinx and Hispanic students. And both of these are websites that students can go and see people who look like them. And these are some resources you can go to help find images and resources that help that look like your students in your classroom. There are also some resources that dispel negative stereotypes about women, because unfortunately, there is a stereotype that girls are bad at math. Barbie used to say that at one time until Joe Bowler got on them. And so now Mattel has changed that. She doesn't say, I hate math anymore. But it's still based, that stereotype still exists. So the first resource is a coloring book by a friend of mine, Dr. Shelley Jones, Women Who Count, honoring African American women mathematicians. So that's a great resource to use in elementary classrooms. The second resource is a book by Talitha Williams. She's actually featured in the movie called Counted Out. If you've never seen that movie yet, try to find a place. There's a showing, Counted Out Film. They have a website that shows all the different places that are screening the film. That's a great place. So the author of this book is featured in that film, Counted Out, but it's called Power in Numbers, The Rebel Women of Mathematics. And then the last website here is biographies of women mathematicians. It's sponsored by Women's College, Agnes Scott College, which is in the metro Atlanta area. And so it features a lot of women mathematicians. So these are some resources that if you want to find representation and ways to represent the students who are in your classroom, and that you can be an advocate to help um, challenge those messages about who is and who isn't mathematically smart. All right, so that brings me to a culturally relevant task. And what might that look like in a math classroom? Because that's what I always ask. People always ask, well, how does that look in a math classroom? They can easily imagine it in ELA, they can imagine it as in social studies, but math, not so much. All right, so there is an article that's featured in an NCTM publication, Teaching Children Mathematics. And I have the document listed in your handout so you can go ahead and read the article. But the question is, how can a student altercations in the hall lead to a culturally relevant task? So this teacher was noticing that there were these altercations in the hall, and she wondered if it had to do with overcrowding. And so she decided to put her students on the task to decide how they might be able to use math to answer that question. So what they did is they went and studied the number of students per square foot on that hall, and then they compared it to another hall where there were gifted students. They had a hall, it was gifted students. And when they calculated those numbers, lo and behold, of course, the gifted students had fewer people per square foot than their hall. And so she had the students take their data and make a recommendation to their school board. They presented their information to the school board. The school board actually acted on that decision and they reduced the number of students on that hall, on their hall. And guess what? The number of altercations in the hall drastically decreased, if not disappeared altogether. And so students got to learn firsthand that we can use math to solve problems and that there was power in that. They were empowered that they could actually make a difference in their school using mathematics as a tool. So some of you may be asking yourself, well, that's great, but I'm not that creative. I'm not sure if I can do that, if I can create tasks like that. Well, that's why I came up with a continuum. So the next question is, how can we use a continuum of culturally relevant math tasks to help all students feel seen, valued, and capable of deep mathematical thinking? So I'm going to share with you my continuum. And the continuum I created was because just like we don't take kids from kindergarten to calculus, they kind of ease their way into it. I've created this continuum for a place to start because what I don't want to happen is teachers to not get started because they feel so overwhelmed and it seems like such a daunting task. So I have four stages of a continuum. And these stages aren't for students, these stages are for teachers, right? So every teacher can start at stage one. Then when you're comfortable with stage one, you can move to stage two. Then when you're comfortable with stage two, you can move to stage three and then eventually to stage four. Because our goal is for our students to be out empowered to be agents of change. That is our goal. But we know that teachers, it may take a little while to get up to that stage. So let's talk about each of those stages in a little bit more depth. So stage one, start off with a good cognitively demanding math task. And what does that look like? It requires students to figure out what to do. It prioritizes thinking over mimicking. It's not something that students already know how to do. It's something that they have to make sense of. And so make sense of problems and persevering solving them is mathematical practice number one. And so I just kind of summed up, is it cognitively demanding if students have to engage in the mathematical practices to do it? If they only are mimicking a procedure that you've already shown them or they already know how to do, then that's not cognitively demanding. So that's where we have to start. And I'm convinced that the achievement gap would drastically decrease if we gave everyone cognitively demanding tasks. But we oftentimes lower expectations for students who struggle. And so we're like, oh, well, we're not going to make you, we're going to give you easy stuff. I'm only going to give you stuff that you already know how to do or that I've already shown you how to do to help you feel successful. And the it comes from a good place, but the problem with that is they never build the stamina, they never build the skills that they need to be able to figure things out. So where are some places that you can get good stage one tasks? Well, achieve the core, illustrative math, enrich, U cubed. Those are all good places to get stage one tasks. So I'm going to give you an example. What does that look like? So I went to Enrich and got this task. A bat and a ball cost $1.10 in total. The bat costs $1 more than the ball. How much does the ball cost? And the thing that makes this cognitively demanding is that students will automatically look at it and say, oh, that's easy, 10 cents and $1. Because if you add 10 cents and $1, that's $1.10. But when upon closer inspection, you realize, oh, those are only 90 cents apart. It's not $1 more, that's only 90 cents more. So they have to go back to the drawing board. It's more than meets the eye. So I think that's what makes this cognitively demanding. All right, so then next thing you can do is take it to a stage two task. And that's a task that has meaningful names, that you've changed the names and made them meaningful to your students. You've put your students' names in there, put your names, put your colleagues' names, put your principals and administrators' names, put the names of restaurants. Um, and that's what's finding about the community. That's where understanding your students well can come in when you're putting in relevant names. Finding out. I've had uh, schools do virtual community walks using Google Maps. You can use Google Maps to do virtual community walks around what's going on around the neighborhood that your school is. And you can include some of those names in those problems. So in this case, I added the robotics club here, and I named a school. Um, and then I added a picture here just to make it a little bit more appealing. Now, I do want to give a little caution. If you do not have a student named Pablo, do not put Pablo's name in the problem. This stage is not adding ethnically sounding names. This is asking you to put names that are relevant to your students. So put your students' names. But I think that's a baby step and it's a very good first step. And I've seen it. I know I used to intentionally do it for tests. And I used to put my students' names on their tests. And when I see during a test time that students are smiling because they see their friends' names in the problem, that's a good thing. That's actually freeing up their brains when they're smiling to be able to do that cognitively demanding work that I want them to do on the test. All right. Then there's a stage three task is where you change the context. So stage one is cognitively demanding. Stage two, you add meaningful names, names that are meaningful to your students. And stage three is you replace the context with one that is meaningful to your students. So in this problem, I said Rochelle, who owns her own hair salon, has developed a braid spray to help her customers keep their hairstyles longer. Rochelle charges $110 for cornrows, along with her braid spray if the cornrows cost $100 more than the braid spray. How much should Rochelle charge for each item separately? So notice when I changed the context, I did change the number slightly so that it would fit the context, but notice that I added a picture of someone with beautiful braids. And so when I was thinking about doing this problem, one thing that I knew was that a lot of my Black female students like to braid hair. And it was important for me to honor that they like to do it, but I wanted to make sure I did it in non-stereotypical ways. So notice in the problem, I have her, she's the owner of her own hair salon. So I'm challenging stereotypes right there. She owns her hair salon and she's invented her own braid spray. So these are ways, subtle messages that I'm challenging stereotypes, just even with the math problem that I'm giving. But my students that I asked at the beginning of the year what things that interest them, they are able to see themselves in this stage three task. And then the stage four task is how do you empower your students to be agents of change? And so with this, I could ask questions like, well, how many Black-owned salons are in your neighborhood? And what steps might members of your community take to increase the number of Black-owned salons in your neighborhood? What are the steps for getting a patent and why might that be beneficial? So these are all ways to get your students thinking about how they can use the mathematics to be agents of change. And this picture right here is actually a colleague that I met at a conference event that I was attending. She actually has her own hairline, her product hairline. So I asked her for a picture. So this is actually a friend of mine that has her own um, hair care line. And just once again, can help defy stereotypes about my students. So that brings me to thinking about what we just shared. We talked about the ICUCARE framework. We talked about the C, the U, and the C. And I showed you the four steps in the continuum of how we could use it. So my question here now is what was the most important idea that you learned today? What was the most important? So just answer if you can put in the chat, the most important idea that I learned today was, and go ahead and finish that and put it in the chat. Thank you so much. All right, so now I want to just to take a little shift and I want you to think about what are you going to do with this information? Like next week, within the next week, what are you going to do with this information? And so now I will make it available for questions.
Thank you so much, Dr. Seda. Questions have been coming in into the chat, so we'd like to address some of those. The first question is asking, can you share some examples of how teachers and coaches can use the framework to get started with this work?
Certainly. So one of the first ways I can think of to get started is to do a book study. I actually have created a facilitator's guide, which can be done during professional learning community times, departmental meetings, or team lead meetings, to where it's a 10-month study. So once a month, if you want to meet once a month, you can use that study guide. So that's a way to do the book study. The other thing that I think is a good way to get started is just think about how do I start with the include others as experts, and think about what are some ways that I can create a community of learners in my classroom, and just start there. So in the book, Choosing to See, there are lots of examples. So that I start off with each principle and I talk about why it's important, but I give a lot of different examples. So what I would suggest is just have teachers choose something that they see in the book, one strategy, try it, and maybe have a thought partner with them that they try something and then they come back and talk about how did it go. And I can't remember. I really wish, I think it was I forgot who talked about the first pancake. The idea of a it'll come back to me. I see their face, it'll come back to me. But they talk about the idea of a first pancake. When you're making pancakes, your first pancake is either overcooked or undercooked. It usually always is. Right. And so when that first pancake comes out undercooked, and oh, okay, I need to turn the heat up so that it comes out better. And when we're implementing new strategies, almost the first time that we do something, it's going to be that first pancake. It's going to be not perfect. But the nice thing about having a thought partner with you is you can talk about what happened and you can discuss, okay, how can I adapt it so it works better the next time? So don't get discouraged, because it is easy to get discouraged when you try something. Thank you, Zaretta Hammond. I saw her face. Her name just escaped me. Thank you, Zaretta Hammond. Exactly. That first pancake. Um, so those are some things that I think are really good ways to get started.
Okay.
And
And from the
start by
same
doing, not just talking, but doing.
Thank you. And the same person who just helped us out with that name is saying thank you for your presentation and sharing examples and your reasoning around the continuum shifts. And they're wondering if you have anything to say around classroom culture and interactions, not necessarily creating tasks.
Yeah, that's like implementing the tasks, right? Implementing the task definitely is is the next step. And that's what I would say is the rest of the ICUCARE framework. Is talks about how do you create that culture. So the I, include others as expert. The A is assess, activate, build on prior knowledge. The R is release control, and E is expect more. And so definitely those other principles really have to do with how do you implement those tasks in ways that create a classroom environment so that all your students know that they can do the work. So it it is definitely those other letters are the things that you think about. And the thing that I think about with that E, I think that E, the expect more, really supports everything. It kind of like ties the whole package together. And I kind of just made it easy. I know there's a lot of conversation about rigor and whether it's cognitively demanding. And I really just say it's just really boils down to the standards for mathematical practice. And if you can think about what do you do as a teacher to make sure your students are making sense, that they're persevering, that they're constructing those viable arguments, that they're doing those things that are the math practices, then kids will be able to benefit from those tasks. But I'm so glad that you brought out that point. Just because you give kids a task doesn't mean they're going to benefit from it. If you implement that task, that is very teacher directed. We got to we have to allow the students to do the work.
Right. I have another question. What are recommendations for how teachers should think about their own identities as they select contexts for problems that are relevant to their students? Mm.
Yeah, I mean, every teacher is a part of the community, right? And so their identities are important, but not the only one that's important. And the thing about the critical consciousness piece is helping teachers be conscious of the fact that there are what we call low status and high status students that are in our class, right? Low status students are often groups of part of marginalized groups, and we marginalize students for all kinds of reasons. Whether they're special ed, we marginalize them because of what neighborhoods they live in, whose family, who were their brother was their sister, their brother, their mama were all troublemakers. And so, like, we marginalize kids for all kinds of reasons. And so, one of the things that I think is two things that's important. One is to be conscious so those cultural mismatches don't happen, right? If you are not conscious of the cultural norms that you expect and aren't paying attention that there may be other cultural norms, this cultural mismatch may be happening and you don't even recognize it. Because the reality is, students who share your same cultural norms are the ones who are going to be learning the easiest. Those who share your cultural norms. So one is just pay attention and be aware that that's happening. But the second is teachers need to recognize their power as teachers to be able to then use that power as the teacher in the classroom to lift the status of low status students. So what I mean is, let's say there's a student that's very artistic and oftentimes is not really valued for their math expertise. So you might see a solution that they engaged in where they drew something very unique. So you would use that opportunity to really point out to that person, allow that person, to share how they thought about that program, how they're drawing, really support it, and just really what I call it, bring shine to their work. And that is a way of you consciously elevating their status in the classroom. So it really is you consciously understanding both your privilege as a teacher, your privilege of the cultural norms that you bring to the classroom, and using that to lift the status of the students in your classroom.
Thank you. I think we have time for one more question. In terms of this continuum that you shared, how do we encourage or support teachers who stay on that stage 2, right, with the changing of meaningful names, and encourage them to move forward to stage 3 and 4?
Yeah, well, one is to find out why, right? What's the reluctance? And my experience has been either one, they're afraid of reinforcing stereotypes. And the way you get around that is find out what your students know, right? Don't make assumptions. If you use information that actually from your students, then you don't have to worry about stereotypes, right? You're basing it on conversations you've actually had with your kid. But the other reason I have found is oftentimes teachers just don't feel like they're very creative. And this is where I think AI is a great tool. I use AI. I've just recently discovered, I was at Stanford at a workshop. I've just really just recently discovered CoTeach.ai. And CoTeach.ai is like ChatGPT and illustrative mathematics had a baby. And so it's got all the rich pedagogy from illustrative mathematics, but with the engine of AI like ChatGPT. And what I do is I'll take a problem that I think is cognitively demanding and I'll put it in AI, and the prompt will be um, revise this problem and make it engaging to ninth grade students at my name of my school who are interested in, and I put the information in that from my survey. And I'll say, give me several options. And it will. It'll give me several options, and then I get to pick the ones that I think will be appropriate for my students. So that's how I would encourage them. I would encourage them to use AI, use the information about their students to help them overcome the fear of reinforcing stereotypes.
Thank you so much for sharing your tips, your ideas, and for grounding us, right, in what means to design math experiences that truly honor our students. Thank you for reminding us that culturally relevant tasks aren't just add-ons, but they're powerful ways to spark deep thinking by connecting to math to students' lives. I'm going to go ahead and share Thank you so much, Dr. Seda. In our next session, we will be joined by Marilyn Burns, who will share what reasoning looks and sounds like in a K-5 classroom. And on behalf of the forum, thank you for joining us tonight. If you have not already done so, we hope you will take a few moments to explore the forum website and the resources it has to offer. We look forward to seeing you again on December 10th at 7 p.m. Eastern Time for our next presentation. Thank you so much.